Outside the towering mansion, a winter storm was just beginning, but inside the grand library, the atmosphere was even colder. Marcus Sterling, a man whose immense wealth controlled everything around him, was losing control. He stood over the kneeling maid, Elena, his face dark with fury. "You have 5 seconds," Marcus growled, his voice vibrating through the silent room. 5 seconds to explain why you were hurting my daughter with those things, before I call the police and end your life as you know it." Elena was shaking so hard she could barely hold the small silver tweezers in her hand. Tears streamed down her face, dripping onto the expensive Persian rug. She looked past the angry billionaire to the little girl standing behind him. "Lily, 8 years old, you have to understand something about Lily. She lived in a world of total, absolute silence. Because she had been born deaf, she had never learned to speak. Not a word, not a whisper, not even a cry at birth. For 8 years, she had been completely mute, a silent doll in a big, empty house. I wasn't hurting her, sir," Elena whispered, her voice cracking with fear. "I was freeing her." Elena raised her trembling hand. Clamped tightly in the tweezers was a small, solid black object. It looked dense, like hardened tar. It was coated in fluids. "Look at it," Elena pleaded. It was inside her ear, deep inside. Marcus frowned, staring at the disgusting object. The anger in his eyes flickered with confusion. And then the impossible happened. Behind him, the little girl took a step forward. Her eyes were wide, darting around the room, trying to process a sensation she had never felt in her entire life: sound. She looked at her father's back. She opened her mouth. Her throat muscles, unused for 8 long years, struggled to work. A sound came out. It was rough, raw, like a rusty hinge moving for the first time. Daddy," Marcus froze. His entire body went rigid. The air rushed out of his lungs. He slowly turned around and dropped to his knees, staring at his mute daughter in absolute disbelief. But this wasn't a miracle. This was evidence of a crime, because what Elena had just pulled out of that child's ear wasn't a natural blockage. It was placed there deliberately. It was a weapon used to keep the Sterling heiress silent forever. Who would do such a thing to an innocent child? And more importantly, why? Before we dive into this dark mystery, do me a huge favor. If you love soulful stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, please hit that subscribe button for Black women's soul stories. It really helps us grow this family. And I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Done? All right. Now take a deep breath. Because to understand how this nightmare began, we have to go back to the start. To the cold November day, Elena walked through the gates of the Sterling mansion, desperate for a paycheck, and found something much darker instead. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-November when Elena stood before the iron gates of the Sterling estate. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with clouds that promised snow, but the cold she felt didn't come from the wind. It came from the house itself. The mansion sat on a hill, massive and imposing, built of gray stone that looked like it had been carved out of a jagged cliff. There were 50 windows facing the front, but not a single one showed a warm, welcoming light. From where Elena stood, the house looked like a giant beast sleeping with its eyes open, watching anyone who dared to approach. Elena gripped the strap of her worn-out canvas bag until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She had to do this. She thought of the crumpled letter sitting on her kitchen table back in her tiny, drafty apartment. Final notice. The words were stamped in red ink. The nursing home was going to evict her grandmother if she didn't pay the overdue balance by Friday. Her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, the woman who had taught her to play the cello and listen to the music of the world, was about to be thrown onto the street. "Do it for Nana," Elena whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the wind. She reached out and pressed the buzzer on the intercom. There was no voice, no greeting, just a loud metallic buzz that signaled the gate was unlocking. The heavy iron bars groaned as they swung open slowly, the hinges screeching like something in pain. Elena walked up the long, winding driveway. The gravel crunched loudly under her cheap sneakers. Crunch, crunch, crunch. In a place this quiet, even her footsteps felt like an intrusion. The gardens were perfectly manicured. The hedges were trimmed into sharp, geometric shapes. There were no wild flowers here, no overgrown branches. Nature in this place was controlled, suffocated, just like everything else. When she finally reached the massive oak front doors, she raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles could even graze the wood. Standing there was a woman who looked like she was made of steel and ice. She was tall, wearing a crisp white nurse's uniform that was so bright it almost hurt to look at. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun, pulling the skin of her face taut. Her eyes were gray and sharp, analyzing Elena from head to toe in a single second. This was Ms. Halloway. "You are late," Ms. Halloway said. Her voice was smooth and cold, like syrup kept in a refrigerator. Elena instinctively checked the cheap plastic watch on her wrist. I'm sorry, ma'am." "My watch says 1 o'clock exactly." "It is 1 minute past 1, Ms. Halloway corrected, not blinking. "In the Sterling household, time is precision. If you cannot keep time, you cannot keep this job." "It won't happen again," Elena said quickly, lowering her eyes. She couldn't lose this. She simply couldn't. Ms. Halloway stepped aside, allowing Elena to enter. The foyer was enormous. The floors were black marble, polished to such a high shine that Elena could see her own terrified reflection looking back at her. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor, and above it hung a crystal chandelier that must have cost more than Elena would earn in 10 lifetimes. But the first thing Elena noticed wasn't the wealth. It wasn't the gold-framed portraits or the velvet curtains. It was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. There was no hum of a refrigerator, no ticking of a clock, no distant sound of a television. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. The air smelled of lemon polish and old, cold stone. "Follow me," Ms. Halloway commanded, turning on her heel. Her shoes were hard-soled, and they clicked sharply on the marble floor. Click, click, click. The sound echoed like gunshots in the empty hall. Elena followed, her rubber-soled sneakers making no sound. She felt like a ghost haunting a graveyard. "Your duties are simple," Ms. Halloway said without turning around, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "You will clean the east wing. You will do laundry. You will polish the silver. And most importantly, you will stay out of the way. Mr. Sterling is a busy man. He does not like to be seen, and he does not like to be heard." "And the child?" Elena asked tentatively. "The agency said there was a daughter." Ms. Halloway stopped abruptly. She didn't turn around immediately. The silence stretched for a few uncomfortable seconds. Then she turned slowly to face Elena. Her eyes were dark and unreadable. "Miss Lily," Halloway said, testing the name like it was a bad taste in her mouth. "Miss Lily is in the sunroom. You are not to bother her. You are not to try and communicate with her. She is deaf and she is mute. She lives in her own world. Do not try to bring her into yours." Elena nodded, feeling a chill run down her spine. "I understand." "Do you?" Halloway stepped closer, invading Elena's personal space. "The last maid tried to teach her sign language. She thought she could help. She was fired within 2 days. Mr. Sterling has accepted his daughter's condition. He does not need false hope from the help. Do you understand now?" "Yes, ma'am," Elena gulped. "Good. Put your bag in the servants' quarters. Then start with the windows in the sunroom." 10 minutes later, Elena walked into the sunroom with a bucket of warm water and a squeegee. This room was different from the rest of the dark house. It was made almost entirely of glass, looking out over the gray, dreary gardens. The light here was unforgiving. And there, sitting in the middle of the floor, was a tiny figure, Lily Sterling. She was small for an 8-year-old, frail, with long, pale blonde hair that fell over her face like a protective curtain. She was wearing a pristine, expensive velvet dress that looked stiff and uncomfortable, like a doll still in its packaging. She sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, her back to Elena. Elena moved slowly, her heart aching instantly. The girl looked so lonely, a small island in a sea of glass. Elena dipped her sponge into the water. She wrung it out, trying to be quiet out of habit, but a few drops splashed back into the bucket. Splash. Lily didn't move, she didn't flinch, she didn't turn. Elena walked closer to the window. She started to wipe the glass. The rubber squeegee made a low, vibrating squeak against the pane. It was a sound that would make anyone grind their teeth. Lily remained frozen. It was true then. She couldn't hear a thing. The wall of silence around her was absolute. Elena looked down at the girl. Lily was holding a paintbrush, moving it across a canvas. Elena leaned in slightly to see what the child was painting. She expected to see a house or a flower or a sun, the things children usually painted. But the canvas was covered in black and angry swirls of dark blue. It looked like a storm. It looked like chaos. It was a painting of noise. It was as if the girl was screaming onto the canvas because she couldn't scream with her voice. Suddenly, the floor vibrated beneath Elena's feet. A heavy delivery truck was rumbling down the distant highway miles away. The vibration was faint, barely noticeable to Elena, but Lily dropped her brush. Her hands flew up to her chest. Her eyes went wide. She looked around frantically, sensing the tremor in the floorboards. She looked like a frightened deer. Elena realized something in that moment. Lily wasn't just deaf. She was hypersensitive. She felt the world through her skin. She felt the vibrations that sound made, even if she couldn't hear the sound itself. Elena wanted to say something to comfort her, but Ms. Halloway's warning rang in her ears, "Do not bother her." Elena went back to cleaning, but she kept stealing glances at the girl. And then she saw it. Lily reached up with her small hand and rubbed her right ear. She didn't just rub it, she pressed the heel of her hand against it, hard, and then winced. A look of pure pain crossed her delicate face. She did it again. Rub, press, wince. Elena paused, the squeegee dripping water onto the floor. She knew that look. It wasn't the look of a disability. It was the look of an infection, a blockage, something that hurt. Ms. Halloway had said Lily was born deaf. She said it was permanent. She said it was a condition they had to accept. Then why, Elena thought, narrowing her eyes as she watched the little girl suffer in silence, is she touching her ear like there's something inside trying to get out? Elena didn't know it yet, but that simple question was about to unravel a $20 million lie. But before she could get a closer look, the heavy wooden door of the sunroom creaked open. Ms. Halloway stood there, holding a small brown bottle with a golden label. "Time for her medicine," Halloway said. Elena watched as the nurse walked over to the child. Lily didn't look up, but her body stiffened. She was terrified, not of the silence, but of the cure. The room went still as Ms. Halloway unscrewed the cap of the small brown bottle. Click, click. The sound was sharp, like dry bones snapping. Elena stood in the corner, clutching her cleaning rag, her eyes locked on the bottle. The label was gold, shimmering under the cold lights of the sunroom. It read Orem X. It looked expensive, imported, the kind of medicine only billionaires could afford. But there was something about the way Ms. Halloway held it, not with the gentleness of a healer, but with the precision of a mechanic oiling a machine. "Head," Halloway commanded. Lily didn't need to hear the word. She knew the routine. The little girl tilted her head to the left, exposing her right ear. Her small hands gripped the hem of her velvet dress so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She closed her eyes, bracing herself. Elena took a step forward, her instincts screaming at her to intervene. Is she in pain, ma'am?" Halloway didn't look up. It is a necessary treatment. The auditory nerves must be kept lubricated to prevent atrophy. Mr. Sterling pays a fortune for this compound. It is the best science Switzerland has to offer. She positioned the dropper over Lily's ear canal. Elena watched, holding her breath. A single drop of thick, amber liquid fell from the glass tip. It didn't look like saline or oil. It looked heavy, viscous, like honey mixed with glue. It landed in Lily's ear. The reaction was immediate. Lily didn't scream, she couldn't, and she didn't cry out. Instead, her entire body seized up. Her back arched, her mouth opened in a silent gasp, and a single tear escaped from her tightly squeezed eyes, tracing a hot path down her pale cheek. Halloway administered a second drop, then a third. The smell hit Elena's nose a moment later. It drifted across the room, faint but undeniable. It didn't smell like medicine. It didn't smell like eucalyptus or antiseptic. It smelled chemical, acrid. It smelled like the resin Elena used to use to polish the wood of her grandmother's old furniture. "Stay still," Halloway said, though the girl hadn't moved an inch. The nurse massaged the area behind Lily's ear, working the thick fluid deep into the canal. Done. She capped the bottle and slid it into her pocket. She needs to rest now. The treatment makes her dizzy. Finish the windows, Elena, and then move to the west wing. The music room needs dusting. No one has been in there for years. Halloway turned and marched out of the room, the click, click, click of her heels fading down the hallway. Elena was left alone with the child. Lily remained frozen for a long time, her head still tilted, letting the medicine settle. When she finally straightened up, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She rubbed her ear again, that same frantic, painful pressing motion Elena had seen earlier. Elena's heart broke. She walked over to the girl and knelt down, ignoring the rules. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped peppermint candy she had saved from her own lunch. She held it out on her flat palm. Lily looked at the candy, then up at Elena. Her eyes were guarded, full of a maturity no 8-year-old should have. She hesitated, then slowly reached out and took the candy. She didn't eat it, she just held it, clutching it like a treasure. Elena smiled softly and signed, tapping her chin with her fingertips, the universal sign for thank you, hoping the girl might know it. Lily just stared. She didn't know sign language, she didn't know anything except this silence and that pain. Elena stood up, her resolve hardening. That smell, that chemical smell. It was stuck in her nostrils. She knew something was wrong, but she was just a maid. She had no power here, not yet. An hour later, Elena found herself in the West Wing. If the rest of the house was quiet, the West Wing was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the shafts of gray light filtering through the heavy drapes. The air here was stale, tasting of old paper and neglect. She pushed open the double doors to the music room. It was a magnificent space, with a high vaulted ceiling and walls lined with acoustic panels. In the center stood a grand piano, covered in a white sheet like a ghost. But Elena wasn't looking at the piano. Her eyes were drawn to the corner where a large, battered case stood upright against the wall. Elena walked toward it, her footsteps muffled by the thick, dusty carpet. She knew that shape. She knew the curve of that case better than she knew her own face. She reached out and unlatched the clasps. Snap, snap, she opened the lid. Inside, resting on crushed blue velvet, was a cello. It was old, the wood a deep, rich mahogany, though the varnish was dull from years of neglect. A layer of dust coated the strings. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. Her grandmother used to play a cello just like this. The sound of it had been the soundtrack of Elena's childhood, a deep, mournful sound that felt like a warm hug. She couldn't help herself. She checked the door empty. She reached in and lifted the instrument. It was heavy, solid. She found the bow in the side pocket. The horsehair was loose, but she tightened the screw at the frog until it was taut. She sat down on a covered bench, positioned the cello between her knees, and brought the bow down to the lowest string, the C string. She drew the bow across the string, hoo-wum. The sound was low, powerful, and resonant. It wasn't just a noise, it was a physical force. The vibration traveled through the neck of the cello, into Elena's chest, down through the spike, and into the wooden floorboards. It was a sound you didn't just hear, you felt it in your bones. Elena closed her eyes and played a simple scale. The notes rose and fell, filling the stagnant air with life. For a moment, she forgot about the debt, the nursing home, the terrifying nurse, and the silent billionaire. She was just Elena, and she was making music. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't know anyone was there until she felt a shift in the air, a presence. Elena gasped and stopped playing. The bow hovered over the strings. She spun around, terrified it was Ms. Halloway, but it wasn't. Standing in the doorway, clutching the peppermint candy in one hand and the doorframe with the other, was Lily. The little girl was staring at the cello with wide, saucer-like eyes. She wasn't looking at Elena's face. She was looking at the instrument. Elena stayed perfectly still. She remembered the truck. She remembered how Lily had felt the vibration of the engine miles away. Slowly, carefully, Elena turned back to the cello. She looked at Lily, then placed the bow back on the thickest string. She played a long, sustained note, hoo-wum. Lily's eyes widened further. She took a step into the room, then another. She was walking toward the sound. No, she was walking toward the feeling. Elena kept playing, making the notes swell, making the wood of the instrument tremble. Lily reached the bench. She stood inches from the cello. She reached out a hesitant hand. Elena nodded encouragingly, not stopping the music. Lily placed her small palm flat against the body of the cello. As the vibration hit her hand, a shockwave seemed to go through the girl. Her mouth formed a perfect O. She could feel it, the deep, rhythmic thrumming of the wood against her skin. It was the first time in her life she was experiencing music. She pressed closer. She put her other hand on it. Then, she did something that made Elena's vision blur with tears. Lily leaned forward and pressed her chest against the side of the cello. She closed her eyes, letting the vibrations resonate through her entire ribcage, merging her heartbeat with the music. For the first time since Elena had arrived at this godforsaken mansion, the little girl's face changed. The fear vanished. The pain vanished. And slowly a smile spread across Lily's face. It was a beautiful, radiant smile that lit up the gloomy room. Elena played for 10 minutes. She played lullabies, she played sonatas, she played the songs her grandmother had taught her. And for 10 minutes, the billionaire's deaf daughter wasn't disabled. She was listening. She was feeling the world in a way no one else could, but the moment couldn't last. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway made the floorboards creak, a different kind of vibration. Sharp, angry, Lily felt it instantly. She pulled away from the cello, the smile vanishing as if it had been slapped off her face. She scrambled backward, terror returning to her eyes. Elena lowered the bow just as the double doors were thrown open. It wasn't Miss Halloway. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than a car. He had silver hair and cold, calculating eyes. He wasn't Marcus Sterling. He looked like him, but sharper, crueler. This was Richard Sterling, the uncle. He stared at Elena, then at the cello, and finally at the terrified girl. "What?" Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you think you are doing making this racket?" Elena stood up quickly, shielding Lily with her body. I was just cleaning, sir. I found the instrument and—" "Cleaning?" Richard stepped into the room. He didn't look at Elena, he looked at Lily with a gaze that made Elena's skin crawl. It wasn't the look of a loving uncle. It was the look of a man inspecting a problem he hadn't managed to get rid of yet. "My niece requires absolute quiet," Richard said smoothly. "Her condition is fragile, loud noises, vibrations. They confuse her, they upset her equilibrium." He walked over and snatched the bow from Elena's hand. "You are here to scrub floors, not to host a concert," he sneered. "If I catch you disturbing this child again, you won't just be fired, I will make sure you never work in this city again." He pointed to the door. "Get out, and take that noise with you." Elena grabbed the cello case and backed out of the room, her heart pounding. But as she left, she looked back. Lily was standing alone in the middle of the large room, watching her go. She looked at her hands, the hands that had just felt music for the first time, and then she looked at her uncle. And in that look, Elena saw something new. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was defiance. The girl had tasted the world, and she wasn't going to let them take it away again. That night, the mansion was quieter than a grave. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, biting wind that rattled the windowpanes of the servants' quarters. Elena lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lily's face, that brief moment of pure joy when she felt the music, followed by the terror when her uncle walked in. But it wasn't just the memory of the music that kept Elena awake. It was the smell. That sharp, chemical scent of the medicine Ms. Halloway had put in the girls. It was haunting her. Elena sat up. She knew she shouldn't. She knew the rules: stay out of the way, stay invisible. But she also knew something else. Her grandmother always said that evil thrives in the dark because good people are too afraid to turn on the lights. She slipped out of bed, pulling her thin cardigan around her shoulders. She put on her rubber-soled sneakers and opened her door. The hallway was pitch black. She moved silently, guiding herself by memory and the faint moonlight spilling through the high windows. She wasn't going to the kitchen. She wasn't going to the library. She was going to the trash. Earlier that day, she had seen Miss Halloway throw something away in the main hallway bin, a small, crumpled piece of paper that had fallen out of her pocket when she pulled out the medicine bottle. Elena reached the main hall. The shadows of the statues stretched across the floor like long, grasping fingers. She found the ornate brass wastebasket near the nurse's station. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, 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 she reached in. It was empty except for a few tissues, and there it was, a small, crumpled receipt. Elena snatched it and retreated into the shadows of a nearby alcove. She smoothed the paper out with trembling fingers. It wasn't a pharmacy receipt. It was a shipping invoice. Industrial resin compound model 4X caution, rapid hardening agent. Not for internal use. Elena's blood ran cold. Resin, like glue, like cement. She looked closer at the bottom of the invoice. It wasn't addressed to Ms. Halloway. It wasn't addressed to Marcus Sterling. It was addressed to R. Sterling private account. Richard Sterling, the uncle. Elena covered her mouth to stop a gasp. It all made sense. The uncle didn't want the girl confused by vibrations. He didn't want her cured. He was paying the nurse to pour industrial hardener into the child's ear, layer by layer, day by day, sealing her off from the world permanently. Why? The answer came to her as she remembered a conversation she'd overheard in the kitchen between the cook and the gardener. If the girl is unfit to inherit, the brother gets everything. The company, the money, the estate, everything. They were making her deaf. They were keeping her mute. They were turning a bright, sensitive child into an invalid just to steal her inheritance. Sudden footsteps froze Elena in place. Click, 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 Ms. Halloway. The nurse was walking down the corridor holding a flashlight. The beam swung left, then right, cutting through the darkness. Elena pressed herself flat against the wall, holding her breath. The beam of light passed inches from her face. "Who's there?" Halloway's voice was sharp. Elena squeezed her eyes shut. If she was found now, holding this invoice, she wouldn't just be fired. These people had millions of dollars and zero morals. She could disappear and no one would ever know. A mouse scurried across the floor near the grandfather clock. Skitter, skitter. Halloway swung the light toward the sound. "Filthy vermin," she muttered. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She had the proof, but proof wasn't enough. Who would believe a maid over a billionaire family? She needed to show Marcus Sterling what was happening. But he was always away, always working, always avoiding his daughter because looking at her reminded him of his dead wife. She had to get that blockage out. But how? She was a maid, not a surgeon. If she touched the girl and hurt her, she'd go to prison. If she did nothing, Lily would be trapped in silence forever. Elena crept back to her room, the invoice burning a hole in her pocket. She sat on her bed and opened her old, worn-out Bible. She turned to the story of David and Goliath. A shepherd boy against a giant, a stone against a sword. "I need a stone, Lord," she whispered into the dark. "Give me a stone." The next morning the opportunity came, but it came in the most terrifying way possible. It was 10:00 a.m. Mr. Sterling was gone. Richard Sterling was at the office. Ms. Halloway was in the kitchen, arguing with the chef about the calorie count of Lily's lunch. Elena was polishing the banister on the second floor when she heard it. A thud, a heavy, sickening thud from the floor above. Elena dropped her rag and ran. She raced up the stairs to the third floor to Lily's bedroom. The door was ajar. She pushed it open. Lily was on the floor, curled into a tight ball. She was rocking back and forth, clutching her head. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her face twisted in agony. She was banging her heels against the floorboards. Bang, bang, bang. She was in excruciating pain. Elena fell to her knees beside her. "Lily, Lily, look at me." The girl's eyes were rolled back, white showing. The pressure in her ear must have been unbearable. The resin was hardening, expanding, pressing against the delicate bones of her inner ear. Elena knew this was it. She couldn't wait for a doctor. She couldn't wait for permission. If she didn't act now, the damage would be permanent. The auditory nerve would be crushed. She scooped the child up in her arms. Lily was light, too light. Elena carried her into the bathroom and set her down on the closed toilet lid. She turned on the overhead light. It was bright, clinical. "I'm going to help you," Elena said, though she knew Lily couldn't hear. She signed the word help, one hand flat, the other giving a thumbs up on top of it. Lily saw the sign. She stopped rocking. She looked at Elena with tear-filled eyes and nodded weakly. She trusted her. Elena opened the bathroom cabinet. She frantically searched through the shelves. Band-aids, aspirin, cotton balls. Nothing sharp enough, nothing precise enough. Then she saw it. Sitting on a glass shelf was a manicure set, and inside a pair of fine-point silver tweezers. Elena grabbed them. She turned on the hot water tap and held the metal tips under the scalding stream to sterilize them. Hiss. The water was boiling hot. She dried them with a clean towel. Her hands were shaking. She took a deep breath. Do it for Nana. Do it for Lily. Do it for the truth. She knelt in front of Lily. She gently tilted the girl's head. She turned on the flashlight on her phone and shined it directly into the ear canal. There it was, a wall of black. It looked like obsidian rock blocking the tunnel. "This is going to hurt, baby," Elena whispered. "But then you'll be free." She brought the tweezers closer. Lily flinched. Elena paused. She placed her hand on Lily's cheek, her thumb stroking the tear-stained skin. She let the vibration of her own calm breathing steady the girl. Lily closed her eyes and leaned into the touch. Elena moved in. The cold metal touched the ear. She navigated the narrow canal past the outer rim. She felt the resistance of the object. It was stuck fast. She clamped the tweezers down. She got a grip on the edge of the black mass. 1, Elena counted. 2, she pulled. Lily's eyes flew open. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp of pain. Her little hands grabbed Elena's wrists, digging her nails in. I know, Elena cried, tears blurring her own vision. Almost there. The mass shifted. It made a wet, sucking sound, squelch. Elena pulled harder. It was coming loose. It was sliding out. With one final, sickening pop, the object came free. Elena pulled it out and held it up. It was a plug. A solid, inch-long plug of black resin, molded perfectly to the shape of the ear canal. It was disgusting. It was evil. Lily sat frozen. Her hand went to her ear. She touched the opening. It felt empty. It felt open, and then a sound. From the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour. Dong, dong, dong. Lily jumped. She spun her head toward the door. Her eyes were wide, terrified, and wonderful. She pointed at the door. She looked at Elena. She touched her ear, then pointed at the door again. She heard it. Elena sobbed. Yes, yes, that's the clock. You hear it. Lily started to laugh. It was a strange, broken sound, like a hiccup mixed with a giggle. But it was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. But their joy was cut short. The bathroom door slammed open. Standing there, reflected in the mirror, was Marcus Sterling. He had come home early, and he looked like he had seen a murder. What? He roared, his voice shaking the walls. Are you doing to my daughter? Elena spun around, the bloody tweezers still in her hand, the black plug clamped in its jaws. The time for secrets was over. The time for the truth had arrived. The bathroom was small, but in that moment, it felt like the center of a hurricane. Marcus Sterling lunged forward, his movement so fast it blurred in the mirror's reflection. He didn't see the tears on Elena's face. He didn't see the relief in his daughter's eyes. All he saw was the blood on the tweezers and a stranger touching his child. Get away from her, Marcus screamed. He grabbed Elena by the shoulder and threw her back. She hit the tiled wall with a hard thud, sliding down to the floor. The tweezers clattered from her hand, spinning across the tiles. The black, resinous plug skidded and came to a rest near Marcus's shoe. Daddy, no, the scream didn't come from Elena. It came from the girl sitting on the toilet lid. The world stopped. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Marcus, who had been about to reach for his phone to call security, turned to stone. His arm remained suspended in the air. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. He turned his head slowly, terrified that his mind was playing tricks on him. He looked at Lily. She was pressing her hands over her ears, her face scrunching up. His voice had been so loud, a thunderclap in a world that had been silent for 8 years. It hurt her, but it was a pain that proved she was alive. Lily, Marcus whispered. The word was barely a breath, fragile as glass. Lily looked at him. Her eyes were locked onto his lips. She had spent years watching people's mouths move without sound, but now the movement matched the vibration in the air. She opened her mouth again. Her tongue felt heavy, awkward. She tried to mimic the shape of the word she had just screamed. The word she had kept locked in her heart since she was a baby. Dad, D. It wasn't perfect. It was rough, guttural, broken. But to Marcus Sterling, it was the most beautiful symphony ever composed. He fell to his knees. The billionaire, the tycoon, the man of steel, he crumbled. He crawled across the bathroom floor, ignoring his expensive suit, ignoring the maid in the corner. He reached out to his daughter, his hands trembling violently. You can hear me, he choked out, tears spilling from his eyes. Oh God, Lily, can you hear me? Lily didn't understand the sentence, but she understood the tone. She understood the sound of love. She reached out and touched his face, feeling the vibration of his voice against her fingertips, just like she had with the cello. But this time, she could hear the music too. She nodded, a small, jerky nod. Marcus pulled her into his arms. He buried his face in her small neck and wept. He cried with the force of 8 years of grief, and for the first time, Lily didn't just feel his sobs shaking her body, she heard them. She heard her father's love. Elena sat in the corner, clutching her bruised shoulder, watching them. She was crying 2 silent tears of exhaustion and vindication. After a long minute, Marcus pulled back. He wiped his face, regaining a fraction of his composure. He looked at Lily, then he looked at Elena. The rage was gone from his eyes, replaced by a confused, desperate intensity. How? Marcus asked. The doctors, the specialists in Tokyo, in Bern, they all said it was nerve damage. They said it was impossible. Elena slowly got to her feet. She walked over to where the black object lay on the floor near the sink. She picked it up with a tissue. It wasn't nerve damage, Mr. Sterling. Elena said, her voice steady now. It was this. She held out the tissue. Marcus stared at the black lump. It was hard, shaped exactly like the inner ear canal. What is that? It's industrial resin, Elena explained. It's a chemical hardener. Someone has been pouring it into her ear, drop by drop, for a long time. It built up, layer by layer, until it formed a perfect plug. It blocked everything, sound, pressure, everything. Marcus stared at the object. His face went pale, then gray. Pouring it, but who? Elena reached into her pocket. She pulled out the crumpled invoice she had retrieved from the trash. She smoothed it out and handed it to him. I found this in the trash last night, she said softly. It fell out of Miss Halloway's pocket. Marcus took the paper. He read it under the harsh bathroom light. Industrial resin compound model 4X ship to R. Sterling private account. Marcus read the name again and again. R. Sterling. Richard, his brother, his blood, the man he had trusted with his company, his home, his child. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the sink until his knuckles turned white. Richard, he hissed. The name sounded like a curse. And Halloway. They wanted her invalid, sir, Elena said, connecting the dots for him. If Lily stays deaf and mute, if she's considered unfit, then the inheritance goes to the next of kin. Marcus looked at his daughter. Lily was humming. It was a soft, off-key sound, but she was listening to herself, fascinated by her own voice. She was innocent, she was pure, and his own brother had tortured her for money. The sorrow in Marcus's eyes vanished. In its place, a fire ignited, a cold, dark, terrifying fire. This was no longer just a father. This was a predator who had just realized his cub was being hunted. He stood up. He straightened his tie. He wiped the last tear from his cheek. When he looked at Elena, his expression was deadly calm. Where are they? He asked. Ms. Halloway is in the kitchen, Elena replied. Your brother, Richard, usually comes for tea at 11:00. Marcus checked his watch. It was 10:55. Good, Marcus said. The single word sent a shiver down Elena's spine. He turned to Lily. He kissed her forehead gently. Lily, I need you to be brave for 5 more minutes. Can you do that? Lily didn't understand the words, but she smiled. She pointed to her ear. Tick, tick. She could hear his watch. Marcus turned to Elena. Put the plug in your pocket, keep the invoice, and bring Lily downstairs to the library. Stay in the shadows. Do not come out until I say so. What are you going to do, sir? Elena asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Marcus walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the frame. He didn't look back. I'm going to listen to what they have to say, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. And then I'm going to make sure they never speak again. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 11 times. Dong, dong, dong. Each chime felt like a judge's gavel hitting a wooden desk. Inside the library, the fire had burned down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls of books. Marcus Sterling stood by the window, his back to the room, watching the gray clouds swirl over his estate. He was holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, but he hadn't taken a sip. His hand was gripping the glass so hard it threatened to shatter. Hidden in the alcove behind the heavy velvet curtains, Elena held Lily's hand. They were invisible to the room, but they could see everything through a small gap in the fabric. Lily was trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensory overload of a world that had suddenly turned on its volume. Elena squeezed her hand. Wait, she signed. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Marcus! The voice was smooth, confident, and familiar. It was Richard Sterling. Elena watched through the gap. Richard walked in, wearing an impeccable navy suit, looking every bit the concerned brother. Behind him walked Miss Halloway, carrying a silver tea tray. She looked composed, efficient, the picture of a perfect nurse. I didn't expect you home so early, Richard said, walking over to the leather armchair and sitting down as if he owned it. Halloway said you were upset. Something about the maid. Marcus didn't turn around. He kept staring out the window. "Just a minor disturbance, Richard. It's been handled." Ms. Halloway set the tray down on the coffee table. The china cups clinked softly. "Shall I pour, Mr. Sterling?" she asked. "Please," Marcus said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "And pour one for yourself, Ms. Halloway. You work so hard for this family, you deserve a break." Halloway hesitated, surprised by the kindness, but she nodded. "Thank you, sir." Richard crossed his legs, looking at his brother's back. "Marcus, we need to talk about Lily. I've been looking into that facility in Vermont. The one for difficult cases. They have excellent security. It's time we face reality. She's getting older, she's unmanageable. It's not fair to keep her here like a prisoner." "A prisoner," Marcus repeated, finally turning around. He walked slowly toward them. His face was a mask of stone. He placed his drink on the table, right next to the teapot. "You care so much about her well-being, Richard. You always have." "She's my niece," Richard said, feigning offense. "I only want what's best for the family legacy. Since she is unfit to ever take over the company, we need to restructure the trust fund. I have the papers here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Marcus picked up the papers. He didn't look at them. He looked at Ms. Halloway. "And you," Marcus said softly, "you've been treating her ear infection for years, the Orem X expensive stuff." "The best, sir," Halloway said, sipping her tea. "But her condition is degenerative. There is only so much medicine can do." "Degenerative," Marcus nodded. "That means it gets worse, doesn't it?" "Yes, sir, sadly." Marcus reached into his own pocket. "That's funny because I found a cure." He opened his hand and dropped the black resin plug onto the silver tray. It hit the metal with a hard, flat sound, clack. The room went deadly silent. Richard looked at the black lump. Ms. Halloway froze, her teacup halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened, staring at the object she knew all too well. What is that?" Richard asked, though his voice had lost its confident edge. "That," Marcus said, his voice rising like a coming storm, "is the medicine your nurse has been pouring into my daughter's ear. Industrial resin." Model 4X Halloway's hand started to shake. The china cup rattled against the saucer. Clink, clink, clink. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. That must be earwax and impaction." "Is it?" Marcus pulled out the crumpled invoice. He slammed it down on the table next to the plug. "Then why did my brother pay $5,000 to have it shipped here privately?" Richard stood up, his face draining of color. "Now wait a minute, Marcus. You're being paranoid. I order supplies for the estate all the time. This is a misunderstanding." "Sit down," Marcus roared. The sound was so loud that Richard actually fell back into his chair. "You did this," Marcus hissed, leaning over them. "You plugged her ears. You stole her voice. You let her live in terror and silence for 8 years. Why? So you could take my money, so you could take her birthright." "She's broken, Marcus," Richard snapped, his panic turning into anger. "She was born broken. I just made sure she stayed that way. She's useless. She can't hear, she can't speak. She's a vegetable. Better she be put away than embarrass the Sterling name." "She can't hear," Marcus whispered. A dark, cold smile touched his lips. "Are you sure about that?" He turned his head toward the heavy velvet curtains. "Elena," Marcus said clearly, "bring her out." The curtains parted. Elena stepped out, holding Lily's hand. The little girl walked into the center of the room. She looked at Miss Halloway. She looked at her Uncle Richard. Halloway stood up, knocking her chair over. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Lily let go of Elena's hand. She walked right up to the coffee table. She looked at the black plug on the tray, then up at the man who had ordered it placed in her head. The room was so quiet you could hear the fire crackling. Lily raised a small, accusatory finger and pointed it straight at Richard's face. She took a deep breath, her little chest expanding. "Bad," Lily said. Her voice was raspy, strange, and loud. "You," Lily struggled with the muscles she was using for the first time. "Bad." Richard's mouth fell open. He looked at Marcus, then at the girl. She speaks. She hears everything, Marcus said, stepping up behind his daughter and placing his hands on her shoulders. She heard you call her broken. She heard you call her useless. And now she's going to hear the police drag you out of my house. As if on cue, the library doors burst open. The head of security walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Mr. Sterling, the security chief said, "We have them." "No," Halloway screamed. She tried to run toward the side door, but the officers were faster. They grabbed her arms, pinning them behind her back. "I was just following orders. He made me do it. Richard made me do it." "Shut up, you fool," Richard shouted, struggling as the other officer cuffed him. "Marcus, listen to me. We're family. You can't do this." Marcus walked over to his brother. He looked him dead in the eye. "I have a family," Marcus said, looking back at Lily, who was holding Elena's hand tightly. "And you are not part of it." "Take them away," Marcus ordered. As the wailing nurse and the cursing uncle were dragged out of the library, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. Marcus turned to Elena. The maid was standing awkwardly by the curtain, looking ready to leave, ready to disappear back into the background. "Elena," Marcus said. She looked up. "Yes, sir." "Where do you think you're going?" I should get back to work, sir." "The windows in the West Wing aren't finished." Marcus shook his head. He walked over to her and took her hands, the rough, work-worn hands of a maid that had done the work of a surgeon. "You will never scrub another floor in your life," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave her the world." I just listened, sir," Elena whispered. "Exactly," Marcus smiled. "And that is why I need you. Lily needs a teacher. She needs to learn to speak. She needs to learn to live, and I think she wants to learn the cello." Lily looked up at the word cello. She smiled, a bright, beaming smile that reached her eyes. "Will you stay?" Marcus asked. "Not as a maid, but as family." Elena thought of the debt, the nursing home, the struggle, and then she looked at Lily's hopeful face. "Yes," Elena said, tears spilling over again. "I'll stay." 6 months had passed since the police cars flashed their red and blue lights against the gray stone walls of the Sterling mansion. Winter had melted away, and for the first time in years, spring didn't just bring flowers to the estate, it brought life. If you stood in the foyer now, you wouldn't hear that suffocating, heavy silence anymore. Instead, you might hear the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a rubber ball bouncing against the hallway wall, a sound that used to be forbidden, but was now Marcus Sterling's favorite noise in the world. You might hear the clattering of pots and pans from the kitchen, where Elena's grandmother, Nana, was teaching the stiff, professional chef how to make a proper gumbo. Marcus had moved Nana out of the nursing home and into the guest wing the very next day. He said the house was too big for 3 people, and besides, he had grown fond of her stories. But if you listened closely, past the laughter and the cooking and the footsteps, you would hear something else coming from the West Wing. A deep, resonant hum, hoo-you-um-um. Inside the music room, the dust sheets were gone. The windows were thrown open, letting in the warm May breeze. Lily sat on the piano bench, the cello resting between her knees. She was taller now, her cheeks flushed with health. She no longer wore the stiff, uncomfortable velvet dresses. Today she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said "Loud and Proud." Elena stood in front of her, conducting with a gentle hand. "Watch the tempo, Lily," Elena said softly. "Feel the heartbeat." Lily didn't need to look at Elena's lips anymore. Her hearing aid, a small, discreet device that helped amplify the sounds her recovering nerves were learning to process, caught the voice perfectly. Lily frowned in concentration. She drew the bow across the strings. It wasn't perfect. There was a squeak, a scratch, but then she found the note. A low, mournful, beautiful G sitting in the corner watching them was Marcus. He had changed too. The gray lines in his face had softened. The phone that used to be glued to his hand was nowhere to be seen. He was just a father watching his daughter do the impossible. Lily stopped playing. She looked up at him. "Dad," she said. Her voice was still raspy. She was working with a speech therapist 3 times a week, learning how to form the sounds she had missed for 8 years. It was hard work. Sometimes she got frustrated and cried, but she never stopped trying. "Yes, sweetie," Marcus answered. Did you hear?" Lily asked, forming the words carefully. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I heard every note. It was perfect." Lily shook her head. "No, not perfect, but loud." "Yes," Elena laughed, stepping forward to adjust Lily's grip on the bow. "It was very loud." Lily grinned. She loved that word. Loud. She turned back to the cello. "Again," she commanded. As the music started up once more, filling the room with a melody that vibrated through the floorboards and into their hearts, Elena looked over at Marcus. They didn't need to say anything. The look passed between them, a look of shared trauma, shared victory, and a shared future. They had destroyed the silence. And in its place, they had built a family. The story of the billionaire's deaf daughter wasn't just about the darkness that was pulled out of her ear. It was about the light that flooded in afterwards. It was a reminder that sometimes the things we need to hear the most aren't spoken in words. They are felt. And in the Sterling mansion, for the first time in a decade, everyone was finally listening. And so, the silence in the Sterling mansion was finally broken. Not by noise, but by music, by laughter, and by the clumsy, beautiful first words of a little girl who found her voice. They say money can buy silence, but it takes a willing heart to hear the truth. Thank you for listening to this story on Black Women's Soul Stories. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out.